What if everything you thought you knew about love was a lie? What if the thing that was supposed to save you was the one thing that destroyed you? Maleficent didn't turn dark for no reason. Betrayal taught her that love was a trap. A trap that held her captive for years, twisting her heart and soul until she had no choice but to break free. But breaking free wasn't as simple as walking away. For Maleficent, it meant losing herself in the process. The trauma of being betrayed by someone she trusted, someone she loved, shattered everything she believed in. It was a deep wound, a scar that would never heal. The love she once offered so freely was no longer something she could give. Instead, it became a reminder of her weakness. A constant reminder that love, in the end, only left her broken and empty. This was the beginning of her transformation, the moment she realized that everything she had known about love was a lie. It wasn't a savior, it wasn't a cure, it was a trap. And Maleficent, now alone and disillusioned, made a decision. She would never let herself be vulnerable again. She would never allow herself to love, to trust, to hope. She would guard her heart with the same ferocity with which she had once given it away. In the aftermath of betrayal, Maleficent adopted a defense mechanism, denial. She denied the truth of her emotions, pushing away the pain, refusing to acknowledge the depth of her hurt. It was easier to pretend she didn't care, easier to put up walls and distance herself from the world. But deep down, the truth gnawed at her. The love she once had was still there, buried beneath layers of bitterness and anger. Her heart longed for connection, for understanding, for the very thing she had been betrayed for. But admitting that would mean facing the truth, facing the fact that love wasn't the enemy, betrayal was. And so, Maleficent continued to live in denial, refusing to confront the pain, the heartache, the devastation that had shaped her into who she was now. It was a cycle, a loop that she couldn't escape. Every time she thought she was free, the memories of love and loss would resurface, dragging her back into the darkness. The inner conflict was consuming. She wanted to heal, she wanted to believe in love again, but the fear of being hurt, of being betrayed again, held her captive. She was caught between two worlds, the desire for connection and the need for self-preservation. And with every passing day, the walls around her heart grew higher. The trigger, the catalyst that kept her locked in this emotional prison, was the memory of betrayal. Every time she thought she had moved past it, a reminder would surface. A look, a gesture, a word, something would spark the old wound, reopening it and pushing her deeper into isolation. The breakdown was inevitable. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow unraveling, a gradual descent into bitterness and distrust. Maleficent's emotional walls became her prison, and she couldn't escape. The consequence of her refusal to let go of the pain was clear: she became the villain, the monster, the very thing she had once feared. She had sacrificed her heart for the sake of survival, but in doing so, she lost the very thing that made her human. She became an empty shell, driven only by the need for vengeance, not love. But there was something deeper within her, something that still longed for healing. It wasn't a desire for revenge, it was a desire to feel whole again, to find peace. And that, for Maleficent, was the emotional bridge. The hope that, despite everything, healing was still possible. But the open question remained, could she ever trust again? Could she ever love without fear of being betrayed once more? The walls Maleficent built around her heart weren't just for protection, they were her prison. She thought she could escape the pain, but in doing so, she trapped herself in a world of isolation. She distanced herself from everyone, even from the possibility of feeling something real again. But what if she was wrong? What if the walls she built to keep the world out were the same walls that kept her locked inside? The trauma of betrayal was like a scar on her soul, something she couldn't ignore. Every time she looked at the world, it was through a lens of fear and distrust. But there was more to it than just that. Behind the cold exterior and the harsh decisions she made was a person who had once loved deeply. A person who had once believed in the goodness of others. The loss of that belief, the shattering of her innocence, was the real turning point. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that changed Maleficent, it was the realization that she had been wrong about the world. She had been wrong about love, about trust. And now, she couldn't go back. The emotional pain was too deep. What had started as a defense mechanism, the need to shut herself off from the world, slowly became a part of her identity. She wasn't just protecting herself anymore, she was pushing the world away entirely. It was easier to live in this self-imposed exile, to live in a world where no one could hurt her again. But there was a cost. The more she isolated herself, the more she realized she had lost touch with everything that made her human. The connection she once sought, the warmth of companionship, those things no longer mattered to her. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But deep down, there was a longing. A longing for something she couldn't even name. She couldn't bear to face the possibility that she still wanted to love, still wanted to be loved, despite the pain it had caused her. The inner conflict raged within her. On one hand, the fear of being vulnerable again kept her safe, kept her from being hurt. On the other hand, she couldn't deny that there was a part of her that ached for connection, for intimacy. She just couldn't trust herself to let it in. The trigger for her inner struggle was every person she met, every smile, every gesture. She saw in others the possibility of love, but it was always clouded by the fear of being hurt. Every new relationship was a potential betrayal, and that fear weighed heavily on her. But the breakdown was inevitable. It didn't come in a single moment, but rather over time, as the walls she built became harder to maintain. The longer she kept herself isolated, the more the walls became a part of her, making it impossible to break free. The consequences of this self-imposed exile were clear. She became a shadow of who she once was. The fierce, loving person she had been was buried beneath layers of fear, bitterness, and anger. She had become a stranger to herself. The emotional bridge, however, was still there, somewhere deep inside her. A tiny flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to heal. It wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending the pain didn't exist, it was about finding the courage to let someone in again. But the open question lingered, could she ever trust again? Could she ever open herself to love without fear of being hurt? Maleficent's internal conflict wasn't just a struggle between love and hate. It was the war between her heart and her mind. The heart that longed for connection, for intimacy, for the kind of love that could heal her, and the mind that, scarred by betrayal, demanded she never open herself up to anyone again. The pain from her past weighed heavily on her, pulling her in two opposing directions. On one hand, she was desperate for the warmth of companionship, the kind of relationship that could make her feel whole again. On the other hand, the trauma she experienced had convinced her that love was a dangerous trap, one that could shatter her once more. Her heart, raw and vulnerable, wanted to believe in the possibility of healing, but her mind, hardened by loss, told her to stay away. This internal tug-of-war was something she couldn't escape. The emotional wound of betrayal had left an indelible mark, and as much as she tried to deny it, the pain remained a constant companion. The problem was, there was no way for her to move forward without confronting the very thing that had broken her in the first place. She was stuck, trapped by her own fears and desires. The need for love, the need for belonging, was a fundamental part of her, just like it is for all humans. But for Maleficent, that need was overshadowed by the overwhelming fear that loving someone meant sacrificing herself, only to be hurt again. She wasn't able to get her emotional needs met, because she couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable. Every time she came close to letting someone in, the memories of her betrayal resurfaced, reminding her of the cost of trusting another person. She had been burned, and now, she was afraid of the flames. But as much as she tried to protect herself, Maleficent couldn't escape the fact that she still craved connection. It wasn't about needing someone else to complete her, it was about the need to feel seen, to feel understood, to feel loved without the shadow of pain looming over her. The longing for intimacy was powerful, but so was the fear of it. And this fear held her in a constant state of emotional paralysis. Maleficent's inability to meet her own emotional needs was like a trap she set for herself, a cycle she couldn't break. She needed love to heal, but at the same time, she couldn't allow herself to love again without the fear of being hurt. The deeper issue was that she had built walls around herself, walls so high that even she couldn't get through them. She couldn't even reach the parts of her that still yearned for connection. In trying to protect herself, she had cut herself off from the very thing that could save her. She was locked in a paradox, caught between her desire for closeness and her fear of abandonment. She had been told her whole life that love was supposed to be a source of strength, but now, for her, love was a dangerous thing. She couldn't let go of the fear that love would only bring more pain. And so, she continued to live in isolation, unable to meet the needs that once defined her as a person. The question was no longer whether she could trust others, but whether she could trust herself enough to believe that opening her heart wouldn't destroy her. Could she ever let go of the past long enough to let someone in, or was she forever doomed to live in the cold shadow of betrayal? For Maleficent, the final trigger, the moment that changed everything, came when she saw a glimpse of vulnerability in someone else. It was a fleeting moment, barely noticeable, yet it was enough to stir something deep inside her. She had spent so long hiding her own pain, pushing everyone away, that seeing someone else open up, even just a little, made her question everything she had believed. For so long, she had convinced herself that the world was cruel, that people would always let her down, that love was a weapon used to hurt and control. But in that moment, she saw a crack in her own armor, a crack that allowed the possibility of something different. She realized that she had been closing herself off, not just from others, but from herself. She had been so consumed by fear and anger, by the need to protect herself, that she had forgotten the most basic truth: vulnerability is not weakness. It is the key to connection. And in that moment, Maleficent faced the hard truth that she had been avoiding for so long. The walls she had built around her heart were the very thing keeping her trapped. They were the reason she had never truly healed. She had been holding on to her pain, her anger, her fear, for so long that she couldn't see the possibility of healing, of moving forward. She had built a life around the idea that she was better off alone, that no one could be trusted. But when she saw someone else show their own vulnerability, it made her realize that she had been living a lie. The moment was a trigger, a catalyst for change. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, gradual recognition of the truth. The truth that she was not alone in her pain. That others, too, carried scars and fears, and that there was strength in sharing them. For Maleficent, this realization was a turning point. It didn't fix everything, and it didn't erase the past, but it was the first step toward healing. It was a crack in the armor, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to trust again. She had spent so long denying the possibility of love, of connection, that even the smallest gesture of vulnerability made her question everything she had known. It was a terrifying thought. The idea that love could still be something pure, something real, something worth pursuing. The fear of getting hurt again was still there, but for the first time in a long time, she began to wonder if the risk was worth it. Could she take that first step? Could she let herself feel again, despite the pain it might cause? Could she open her heart to the possibility of something more, something beyond the walls she had spent so many years building? It was a question that lingered, one that she wasn't sure she had the answer to yet. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like there might be an answer. The trigger had set something in motion, and now, Maleficent had to face the most difficult question of all: could she trust again? Could she risk it all for the chance at something real? The shift in Maleficent was gradual, like the slow breaking of a storm cloud, but it was inevitable. She had spent so many years living in the shadows of her own pain, building walls so high that even she couldn't see over them. The betrayal that had once shattered her trust in love had become the cornerstone of her existence. She believed that love was a weakness, something that would only lead to disappointment and destruction. But deep within her, the seeds of change had been planted, and the moment of vulnerability she had witnessed in someone else was the spark that ignited the process. It wasn't immediate, this transformation. It didn't happen in one powerful, dramatic moment. Instead, it was the accumulation of small realizations, small cracks in her armor that made her question everything she had come to believe. She started to see the world in a different light, not as a place where she was doomed to suffer, but as a place where there could be connection, understanding, and, most surprisingly, hope. She had thought for so long that healing wasn't possible, that she would always be trapped in the aftermath of betrayal, but now she was beginning to see that the walls she had built weren't her protection, they were her prison. The more she tried to ignore it, the more she realized that she was suffocating behind her own defenses. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The isolation she had sought for protection was now the thing that held her back from truly living. The paradox of her situation became clear. In trying to protect herself, she had made herself incapable of experiencing anything real. The love she feared so much was the very thing that could heal her, but her fear of getting hurt had paralyzed her, keeping her from reaching out. She had let the pain of her past define her, but the truth was, it didn't have to. The walls had kept her from being vulnerable, but they had also kept her from feeling anything at all. Now, with the realization that love was still possible, the breakdown began. It wasn't a sudden collapse, but a slow, inward breakdown. She couldn't ignore the truth anymore. She couldn't run from the fact that she still wanted something more. She wanted connection. She wanted love. She wanted to stop pretending that she didn't care. It was terrifying. The fear of vulnerability, of opening up to someone again, was overwhelming. But it wasn't just fear that held her back, it was the deep shame she felt for having let herself become so bitter, so closed off. The transformation, the change in her mind and heart, was not easy. It was messy, it was painful, and it was filled with moments of doubt. But for the first time in years, Maleficent began to feel a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: hope. The hope that she could heal. The hope that she could trust again. The hope that she could love again. It wasn't about erasing the past, it was about accepting it and learning to move beyond it. The process wasn't smooth, and it wasn't without its setbacks, but the transformation had begun. And even though she wasn't sure where it would lead, she knew one thing for certain: she could no longer stay the person she had been. She could no longer live in the shadow of her own pain. The old Maleficent, the one defined by betrayal and fear, was slipping away. And in her place, a new version of herself was emerging, one that could embrace love without being consumed by it. A version of herself that could trust again, even if it was difficult. The breakdown was painful, but it was also the beginning of something much more powerful: her rebirth. The long-term psychological consequences for Maleficent were not immediate, but they were profound. The years of building walls, of closing herself off from the world, had left deep emotional scars that couldn't be easily erased. As much as she tried to move forward, the past continued to haunt her. The fear of vulnerability, once a protective shield, became a weight she carried with her every day. The moment of vulnerability she had witnessed in someone else had opened a door, but it was a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. The pain of betrayal had shaped her, molded her into someone who believed that love was a dangerous thing. This belief was so deeply ingrained in her that it became the lens through which she viewed the world, making it hard to trust anyone, even herself. The fear of being hurt again was so powerful that it seeped into every part of her life, even in moments where it seemed like she was letting her guard down. Maleficent's transformation, while powerful, was not without its complications. She began to experience a constant tug-of-war between wanting to trust again and being terrified of the consequences. Every time she allowed herself to open up, even just a little, the old doubts resurfaced, reminding her of the pain she had suffered. It was as though the trauma had imprinted itself on her soul, and no matter how much she wanted to heal, the fear remained. The consequence of this was that Maleficent's relationships, even those she tried to form after the betrayal, were always tainted by her distrust. She would pull away, even when she didn't mean to, retreating back into the safety of her own isolation. She began to doubt her own ability to love, and worse, she doubted her ability to be loved. This self-doubt was a direct result of the trauma she had experienced, and it colored every interaction she had. Even when others tried to reach out, she struggled to believe in their sincerity. The walls she had built, though slowly crumbling, still remained in many ways. The psychological toll of this ongoing inner conflict was immense. Maleficent's emotional landscape was a battlefield, where the desire for connection fought against the need for self-preservation. And in the middle of it all, there was a lingering sense of shame, a belief that she was somehow broken, that her inability to fully trust and love made her flawed. This sense of brokenness was one of the most damaging aspects of the trauma. It wasn't just the fear of being hurt again that held her back, it was the belief that she wasn't worthy of love in the first place. The impact of this belief was long-lasting, affecting not only how she saw herself but how she interacted with the world. Over time, the shame began to shift into something else, a quiet sadness. Maleficent realized that she was missing something fundamental. She had spent so long pushing away the world and everyone in it that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen, to be truly cared for. The longing for connection, for love, was still there, but it was overshadowed by the fear of vulnerability. The consequence of all of this was that Maleficent became trapped in a cycle of wanting something she couldn't have, of needing connection but not knowing how to let it in. It wasn't just the betrayal that had shaped her, it was the aftermath. The damage caused by her inability to trust, by her refusal to be vulnerable, was a slow, insidious force that affected every part of her life. The walls may have cracked, but the scars remained. And with those scars came a deep sense of loss, a feeling that no matter how much she changed, she would always carry a piece of the past with her. The long-term consequence of this psychological battle was not just a broken heart, it was a broken sense of self, one that had to learn, slowly and painfully, to rebuild. But even in the darkest moments, there was a flicker of hope. The possibility of healing was still there, buried beneath the fear and doubt. The question was not whether she could ever heal completely, but whether she was willing to try. Maleficent's journey is one that many of us can relate to, even if we have never faced the same hardships. At her core, she is driven by a deep, unspoken longing, the need to be seen, to be understood, to be loved. It's a feeling that resonates with all of us at one point or another in our lives. The pain of abandonment, the crushing loneliness, the constant feeling of being misunderstood, these are the very emotions that shaped Maleficent into who she is. She doesn't just feel isolated in the physical sense, but in a far deeper way. Her loneliness comes from the absence of emotional connection, from the lack of trust that prevents her from letting others in. It's the kind of loneliness that can make you feel as though you are standing in a crowded room, yet you are still the most alone person there. Maleficent's walls were built out of this deep sense of abandonment, the belief that no one would ever truly care for her or understand her. It's a thought that many of us have had when life seems to keep letting us down. When people fail to meet our needs or, worse, betray us, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that we don't deserve love or that we are unworthy of connection. This sense of being misunderstood is one of the most painful emotions of all. Maleficent, like many of us, felt like an outsider in her own life. No matter how much she wanted to reach out, no matter how much she wanted to believe in others, the fear of rejection and the fear of being hurt again held her back. It's easy to see how someone like Maleficent could fall into the trap of believing that love is not for them, that they are too broken, too damaged to ever find the connection they so desperately crave. Her fear of abandonment became her reality. She withdrew, choosing to live in isolation because it felt safer. But deep down, she still longed for someone to see her for who she really was, to love her despite her flaws, to break through the walls she had built so carefully around herself. This emotional struggle is something that many people experience. We push others away because we fear the pain of being let down. We choose loneliness over vulnerability because the risk of being hurt feels too great. And yet, in doing so, we deny ourselves the very thing we need the most, connection. Maleficent's story is a powerful reminder that we are not alone in our loneliness. We all struggle with feelings of abandonment and the fear of being misunderstood. And, like her, we often build walls to protect ourselves from the pain, not realizing that those same walls keep us from the love and connection we desire. But there is hope. Just as Maleficent slowly began to see that healing was possible, so too can we. The first step is recognizing that we are not defined by our past hurts, that we are not doomed to carry the weight of our isolation forever. It takes courage to open up, to let go of the fear and the shame, and to believe that we are worthy of love. It may not happen overnight, but the journey toward healing, toward finding connection, is always worth the risk. Maleficent's life had become a haunting echo of her own emptiness. Each day was like the next, a series of movements without meaning, a constant march through a world that felt distant and unreachable. She had locked herself away, and the walls she had built around her heart had transformed into a vast, hollow space, an emptiness that she could not escape. The isolation, once a shield from the pain of betrayal, now felt like a prison. Every corner of her existence seemed to be consumed by a deep sense of nothingness. There were moments when the silence in her own mind became deafening, where the weight of her solitude pressed down on her chest, suffocating any hope or joy. She had spent so long fighting against the world, building defenses to keep herself safe, but in doing so, she had cut herself off from everything that once made her feel alive. Love, trust, connection, these had become foreign concepts to her, things she could no longer touch, no longer believe in. Even when she was surrounded by people, Maleficent felt like a ghost. She was there, but not really. She could see the smiles, the laughter, the warmth that others shared, but it felt like it was happening on the other side of a glass wall. She could reach out, but the distance was too great, too impossible to cross. The emotional void she felt was deeper than mere loneliness. It was as if a part of her soul had been hollowed out, leaving her feeling like a mere shell of who she once was. Every attempt to fill that void only seemed to make it worse, like pouring water into a vessel with a hole in the bottom. She tried to convince herself that it didn't matter, that she was better off alone, that this emptiness was just a part of who she was now. But the truth was, the emptiness was a reflection of everything she had lost: trust, love, and the ability to truly connect with others. The fear of vulnerability had kept her trapped in this state of emotional paralysis, unable to break free from the self-imposed isolation. And the longer she remained in this state, the more she convinced herself that she didn't deserve anything different. She had become so accustomed to the quiet, to the coldness of her own heart, that she didn't know how to reach out anymore. She didn't know how to bridge the gap between herself and the world around her. The loneliness had become a part of her identity, something she carried with her wherever she went. There were times when she wondered if she had forgotten how to feel anything at all. Was she capable of love anymore? Was there any part of her that could still experience the warmth of connection, or had she completely shut that part of herself down? The empty spaces inside her seemed to grow larger, more insurmountable, and the more she tried to ignore it, the more it consumed her. Maleficent had lost sight of who she had been before the pain, before the betrayal, before the walls. She had lost touch with the person who was capable of love and trust, and the person she had become was someone who didn't know how to open up, how to let others in. The longer she stayed in this emotional vacuum, the more distant she became from everything that had once mattered to her. The loneliness wasn't just something she felt, it was something she had come to accept as part of her life. It was the constant companion that followed her everywhere, a shadow that loomed over every decision, every thought. And in that silence, in that emptiness, she began to wonder if she would ever feel anything again. Maleficent stood at the edge of everything she had built, staring into the abyss of her own heart. The walls she had constructed, brick by brick, were no longer just protection, they had become her world. It was a world of quiet isolation, of cold certainty that no one would ever get close enough to hurt her again. But as she stood there, looking into the emptiness, something inside her stirred. The years of shutting herself off from everyone, of refusing to let anyone in, had left her numb. She had buried her emotions so deep that she couldn't remember the last time she had truly felt anything. Her mind told her that she was safe, that the walls were necessary, but her heart, a heart that she had kept hidden for so long, was beginning to cry out for something more. For so long, Maleficent had convinced herself that she was better off alone. The fear of being hurt again had overshadowed everything else, making her believe that isolation was the only way to survive. Yet, deep down, a part of her knew that this wasn't living. This wasn't what she had been meant for. The emotional numbness she had cultivated was starting to feel less like protection and more like a prison. It was as though she had locked away her true self, convinced that she wasn't worthy of love, that love would only lead to more pain. But now, standing at this precipice, she began to wonder if she had been wrong. Could it be that the very thing she had been afraid of, the vulnerability of love, was also the key to her freedom? Could opening herself up again, even just a little, lead to something other than the pain she had always feared? These were the questions that Maleficent now found herself grappling with, questions that she had spent years avoiding. And though she was terrified, she also knew that she could not stay in this empty space forever. The walls had protected her, but they had also robbed her of everything that had once made her feel alive. Now, the choice before her was not whether she could trust again, but whether she was willing to try. Could she face the possibility that love might not be a trap, that vulnerability might not destroy her? Could she take that first step toward healing, knowing that the risk of pain was always present? The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with both fear and hope, but one thing was clear: Maleficent had to decide whether she would continue living in the shadow of her past or whether she would step into the light of a new possibility. And as she stood there, she realized that the true question was not about what she could lose, but about what she could gain. Could she find the courage to open her heart again, or would she remain forever locked in the cold embrace of her own isolation?